does that ever affect you in your personal life?
What did you just think about?
Maybe don't take like all the opinions of the internet.
Would you eventually want something different?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why are you doing this?
It's time to get loud. Welcome back to LoudTalk with Lavi, a podcast where we break down the walls of beauty standards one flaw at a time. I have such a special guest for today, Shelly Najjar. Thank you so much for joining me on LoudTalk. I'll give you a minute to introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me. So I am a nutrition mindset coach, trained as a dietitian. I specialize in helping women to develop that healthy and joyful relationship with their food. So that they can feel that peace and confidence in their bodies and in themselves at any size.
I love that. And I'm definitely excited to have you on because I feel like when it comes to nutrition, this is a topic that a lot of people can stay quiet about, and it makes sense. You know, it's very complex. And, you know, on this podcast, I want to get loud about these topics and, you know, talk about things that maybe people are a little scared to talk about or, don't know where to go for the information. So really excited to have you on and have your expertise here on the podcast. So I guess to get started, what kind of made you want to go down this career path?
Yeah, the career path in general, like as far as nutrition, was
Yes.
an 8th grade science fair project. So I was just super interested in all the things that I was reading about nutrition, and the project was about vitamin C in vegetables and whether cooking method affected it. It was very nerdy, but I just really loved learning about something new. And I loved that nutrition was connected to everything else. And so from there, I did a bunch of job shadowing. There was a health, forget what her actual title was, but she was something like a health and wellness kind of like specialist in the school that I was going to for high school. So when I went to high school, I job shadowed her. And then she connected me with some dietitians. And like, that was the first time I saw dietetics in general. And that kind of put me on that path. But the specific things that I do, I didn't learn until after I graduated.
Right. I see. And I guess what challenges have you kind of faced having this career and bringing, like, where does it mesh with your personal life? Because I know for myself, maybe giving an example will make my question more understandable. For me, like, if there's ever a night where, let's say, I skip my skincare routine or I don't take off my makeup or I pick at my skin, it, like, I have this little voice in the back of my head that's like, you're the one who teaches about this, so, like, you should stay on track with, you know, what you preach and all of that. So does that ever affect you, like, being a nutritionist? Does that ever affect you in your personal life?
Of course. And I think, like, you and me both, right? The areas that we teach on and help other people through are things that everyone seems to have a lot of opinions on. Like,
Yes.
opinion, like capital O opinion.
Yes.
Training or no training, like, oh, everybody has skin, so we must all be experts in skincare.
Yes.
Everybody eats, so we must all be experts in nutrition. And like, obviously, everybody who does not really get sarcasm, that was sarcasm. I don't mean those things. But
you have to state it now on the internet because everyone will take what you say and run with it.
I know. At least I'm not like famous or something where you're going to get like little clips and being like, oh, this person said this thing. And you're like, well, obviously that's out of context and she didn't mean it that way, but just in case.
That's so funny.
Yeah. So it's just one of those things, like, you have the things that you actually know and teach, and then you have all the stuff that even a like normal untrained person would also have in their head, because that's just the water we're swimming in. And so that, like, even if you don't agree with it, right, you're still going to get some of that in there. So you have those voices, plus you have the stuff that you actually teach. And I find that I just need a lot of self-compassion. You know, it's just like, I'm doing the best that I can right now, or I'm using, even if sometimes, like, I talk a lot about eating for emotional reasons. And sometimes I'm like, okay, yes, I totally am aware that I'm doing this right now, and I don't care. And I see that it's a coping strategy, and there could probably be a lot of other more helpful coping strategies. And yet I'm still going to choose to do this for whatever reason. Okay, that's my choice. And it's the same choice that I hope to allow other people to have. it's just a lot harder when we're in it. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's like, it's just easier to see it in someone else. So, I mean, there have been times when I have coached myself, like by writing it out, and been like, okay, this is what I'm experiencing. And I switch and like, if this was a client telling me these things, like, what would my advice be? And I write it down. I'm like, oh, okay. Just to give myself that distance, because it's so hard otherwise to see that in yourself, right?
It is. And like kind of switching those hats. I know like for myself, I preach like being confident in your skin and loving your skin. And when I get like down about myself and my own skin, kind of look at myself and I'm like, okay, like what are you doing? Like you're teaching other people this. So you do, as you said, you do kind of have to coach yourself and kind of have that conversation with yourself in a way and be like, okay, what are the coping mechanisms I teach other people? Let me use those on myself. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, because you do have like that internal battle. But kind of going off of that, something you mentioned there that I definitely wanted to touch on was knowing when you do maybe fall out of like the things that you should be doing right, as you said, like emotional eating or as a coping mechanism. I think what a lot of people forget is it's all about like balance, and also just knowing when you do fall out of line, let's say, that it's okay. I think that's one thing I always talk about, like, obviously I'm trying to teach people to always have like good skin days and feel really good, but I think it's also important to talk about like, yeah, there will be bad days and there will be days where you break out of that mindset, and also just knowing your triggers is really important. I know for me, I've had I don't want to say like complex experience with food, because I don't think me personally, I've had like a very negative experience with it. I'm very fortunate to have had a very healthy-ish relationship with food, as much as we can in today's day. But one thing that has really affected me is always having it in the back of my mind of like, is this going to make me break out? And it's this like overlooming like cloud, and just worry. And I've gotten to a place where, of course, not 100% perfect, but now I'm more in the mindset that it's like, yeah, if I have a bunch of chocolate this day or go out drinking with my friends or eat a tub of ice cream, I'm going to break out the next day. But knowing that is like better now than like always trying to avoid it. Obviously, I avoid those triggers as much as I can. I avoid dairy as much as I can. But if I want a milkshake one day, then it's like I want that in that moment, and I'll deal with the breakouts the next day, type thing. So I wanted to get your opinion on that and kind of what your opinion or suggestions are of when people do kind of fall out of that. What is the best way to not be too hard on yourself and also still get back to your routine the next day?
Yeah. Oh, wow. There's so many things I want to address in that. Let me start with just like the very basic of like the question that you, the last part of the question. So I teach something called intuitive eating, and intuitive eating is going back to the way we were meant to eat. Like we were born to eat, and we learn or unlearn that process of eating and like knowing our signals and all that. We have to relearn it a lot of times, and reestablish some of those signals if we've had an unhealthy relationship with food and we've been ignoring them. We have to reestablish them. And so my emphasis is always on using the internal cues rather than the external rules. So because of that, there isn't usually like a falling out of line or falling off the wagon or anything like that, because there's no diet or rules to fall off, like I think that's one of the initial pieces is like, well, if you didn't have like a way you had to eat, you would never be out of line. You might be uncomfortable, right? There may be physical responses to the things that you eat, but it's not like a morally bad thing that
it's not like
have done, right? Like it's not a failure or a box that like now you have to put yourself back in and hide from everybody in the meantime because they know, right? Or they might know.
Yeah. And I love that you say that, because I think so many people feel so much pressure of like, I have to stay, within this rule set, especially when it comes to food. And then if they do step outside of it, it's like, now I must feel ashamed. I must feel guilty. I'm like the most terrible person ever for like doing this. But I love that you do talk about that, because I think, a lot of people, don't look at like nutrition in that way and do see it as a set of rules.
And I think that when we do have those difficult days, whether they're difficult eating days or difficult body days or difficult skin days or whatever it is, that we come at it with a neutral approach rather than like beating ourselves up about whatever is happening and how we're feeling. I mean, going back to, both of us was talking about like, sometimes we don't even do the things that we're telling people to do, or we're not feeling as positive about our bodies as we hope that other people will. That's okay. That's understandable. That's realistic, right? Like, we're not advocating that, not even perfection. We're not advocating that everybody must feel the same emotion about anything consistently for the rest of their lives. I mean,
it's not linear. It goes up and down every day.
No, and I would like to be able to feel like a range of emotions, right? Like, if I only feel positive about my body, that means I cannot feel negative or, uncomfortable in or whatever in my body. Like, that is very much like the toxic positivity idea of things. Like, I don't want that. I want like a real relationship with my body. And some days are better than others, and some days are easier than others. And so I'd rather go for neutral, like, hey, I am having a difficult body day, or, I am having like my skin, or like, I'm just feeling a little like insecure about something. Okay. Like, that is happening. I'm experiencing this.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it doesn't change my identity or my worth or my value. Like, and we can say this about bodies, we can say this about the way we eat, the way we do our skincare, whatever it is.
Everything,
like, it's not something that changes our identity and our core worth as a person, right?
Absolutely. And I think that neutral approach is something that nobody talks about, because even as like for myself, as someone who, tries to spread so much like skin positivity and just like confidence out through my social platforms, I do get comments that are like, oh, like, why are you always just so happy, like, in your skin? Or I wish I could be as confident as you are every day. And I think the misconception is that people don't realize that they do have to be neutral in a lot of these situations, because it can definitely be taken to like two extremes, right? As you said, like, if you're always just 100% like feeling great about your body, you're never going to look to, like, let's say, try to improve it or be healthier, whatever it is, right? And same with your skin, right? Like, I, of course, try to find methods to better my skin and make it, like, get the acne to go down, get the scarring to go down. And I can be at that neutral position where it's like, hey, I don't hate my skin, but, like, I still have goals in mind for it, And I think you can have that approach at the same time. And the neutral approach is definitely something, especially when we talked about like falling out of line, is great, because I think if you are over positive about it, that can instill maybe bad habits to be repeated over time. But then if you are super negative about it too, it's like you're not going to come back from that as easily, right? So keeping that neutral approach, I think, is definitely really important, and something that I think a lot of people do miss when body positivity or skin positivity is talked about, because it's like we're not looking to have like overall happy all the time, positive all the time. We're definitely looking for those waves, but if those waves can stay relatively a little more positive than negative, I think that's the overall goal.
Yeah, and then the idea that it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive with health, right? Like,
yes,
you were talking about, but I think a lot of people, like, I want to clarify this, because I think a lot of people, when we're talking about bodies and looks, the look, like the visible look of something, or a body or the skin or the hair or whatever it is like our measure of health. And that's not true, right? Like, you can be healthier and still look many different ways. And so it doesn't necessarily mean like, just because we're feeling good about our bodies, we won't pursue health. Like,
absolutely.
We don't have to, right? It's not mandated either. But if we so choose, like, we can still pursue health without trying to change necessarily our image as the primary goal, right?
That's a great point you bring up. And I see this with my skin too. People are always like, your skin is so bad, you probably have like the worst skincare routine. And it's like, it just is baffling to me to hear, because it's like I've studied with this for so long. Like, this is what I like eat, sleep, and breathe, and I'm sure like you've kind of seen this in the nutrition space as well. But I've talked about this before, but I feel like when I was like in high school, I was probably like eating the worst, not exercising enough, and like that was like the skinniest I ever was. And since then I've like definitely put on more weight, but I would say I'm healthier now. And it goes to show like that perception of like, people might look at me, a few years ago and be like, oh, she was healthy then, but it's like I definitely consider myself more healthy now. So that perception is really, really messed up in my opinion. And it's I think hard to break through that, because it's been instilled in society for so long. But what are your kind of like recommendations for that, for like viewers listening or whatever, to try to kind of escape that mindset?
Yeah, I think first steps is probably awareness, like most people would say, right? Like you have to
Right.
know that there's a problem, or that there's another possibility. Not necessarily that there's a problem, but you do have to know that there's something different to try. That is,
Mm-hmm.
there is an alternative, right? So that means there has to be an awareness of what we're doing, and sometimes we don't even know because it's the water we're swimming in, it's the world we live in, whatever,
Yeah.
way you want to phrase that. It's the same idea. Like this is so built in to everything that it's so
Absolutely.
hard to see.
Yeah.
Right. So being able to have another alternative, even if you don't like it right away, even if you're like, I would never consider that, just the fact that you now know that there
Mm-hmm.
is something different, that you know that there are some people who would recommend this thing, or there is someone out there who is doing this thing. Maybe you don't feel it's possible for you. Maybe you don't feel like, you even believe it or you'd even want to try, but just that you know that it's out there is the first step if you've never heard about this, right? But I think for your listeners who probably already a little bit aware of this, I think my thing would be like, if it's at all like interesting to you to shift that a little bit, because your comments, the things that you talk about, the way that people are interacting with you, I feel like they already do kind of have that desire to do something different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody is happy with the way things are with our
Yeah.
beauty standards and all of this, um, and how closely beauty is linked to our perception of health, which again,
Yes.
not true, right? That you start to explore, like to start shifting possibilities, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you're playing and you're experimenting in that space. You don't have to commit to it. Like it for the person who's like, hey, I wish I could be as positive about this as possible. Wow, you have that desire.
Mm-hmm.
That's already a first step, right?
Yes.
And then so now, okay, great. You are surrounding yourself with people who do have that belief more often.
Yeah.
You're surrounding yourself with more positive accounts. Like I know you talked about that. Um, things like that, like changing the water a little by little, changing your own possibilities, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily the things that you're choosing, but just that idea of like it could be possible for someone out there, and maybe I would like that, and so maybe
Yeah.
I'm just going to observe and see how that goes for them, because the more that we observe someone else having success in that, the more of a possibility it could become for us, even if we don't believe it right now. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where like coaching and growth and all this stuff like happens over time, right? But I think that can be a really great step, is just like steep yourself in this, like in this world that is out there. There are plenty of people who are, making lots of content around this. I think, you don't have to sign up with somebody. You could, but you don't have to. Like you can just surround yourself with this information and start
Yeah.
changing that idea of like what's normal,
For
right? And
sure.
and even that will start shifting.
Exactly. Surrounding yourself in it, literally. You know how people even say, like, if you want to learn a new language, the first thing you have to do is, like, immerse yourself in
Yes.
other people speaking that language. So it goes the same with whatever you're trying to learn in life, right? And if that is, having a better relationship with food or being more confident, whatever it is, you just have to put yourself in that environment. And slowly over time, it's not gonna be easy, but like slowly over time, you're gonna, like a sponge, absorb some of that it's gonna rub off on you from other people. One thing I did wanna kind of talk about is your take on, I guess, typical like diet structures, diet cultures, and how I know you talk about going away from that restrictiveness and that feeling of like shame. So, what are your opinions on like a lot of traditional like diet cultures?
I think that they're unnecessarily restrictive. I think that they build themselves on shame and guilt and a culture, right? Like they
Mm-hmm.
are a subculture.
Yeah.
Um, like you have your norms of stuff to do. You have your punishments for the people who go against those norms, whether they mean to or they don't mean to. Um, you have some reinforcements. You have like an entirely separate language. You have certain things that you can access as part of that group and things that you cannot access as
Right.
part of that group. Like it is really meeting all the cultural standards. There are people who will even say it meets like the standards of being in religion, which would explain a lot of like why it is so hard for people who aren't ready to switch, right? And it's because you're going against someone's belief system. You're not just going against like their entire culture and all their friends and all this thing that they've known. Even if they're so miserable, right? This is their community.
It's all they
but
know.
It's also their beliefs. So just really, really deeply in there, right?
Deeply rooted.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just so harmful. And it's so sneaky. You know, when we're talking, you mentioned some of the dietary changes that you make. I also make some. I don't know if you can see it on the video, but I do have some acne that comes up. Mine's hormonal acne. And so like there are things that changing what I eat can really help.
Yeah.
And I think that once you have the healthier mindset down, yeah, gentle nutrition practices can be really helpful. And that's again, right? When we're saying health is not the same thing as pursuing a certain look or a size or shape, but you have to have that mindset down first, or it just becomes another diet, right? Like no matter how gentle you try to approach it, it's just another diet if you don't have your mind in the right spot.
It's like a fine line.
Yeah. It's just like so hard to really filter that out if you're not switching your community that you're in, right? Because you just be like this one little fish trying to swim the other direction, and that's lonely and it's hard, and I mean it's tiring, you know. It's like everything is against that, because it's so like diet culture is just so strong, and it's so strongly connected to so many other things in life. Like when you think about how many, like if you think about New Year's, or when people talk about habits, or when they talk about behavior change, what are their like top examples? Changing your diet, changing your shape, changing whatever, right? That's like always.
Yeah.
You can go to like, I don't know, some random industry thing, and they'll still pull an example about weight loss. And you're like, why? Why is this such a thing? But it's because it's so well known. It's so integrated into our culture, this pursuit of something that we also understand is somewhat unattainable, which is so like, it just blows my mind. Like, okay, we're willing to put so much energy and money and effort and like drama around this, and for what? And like nothing, right? Like it's just, yeah, it's so hard. Sure. And then it becomes like this obsession and compulsion, and it's just not a good situation.
Obsession is a great way to put it, because you do become obsessed with this like unattainable standard maybe, and it takes over your whole mind, your whole like life, and it can become, I mean, it can go bad really quickly, right? And I think one thing that you talk about is how these typical like diet cultures really just set you up for failure. Do you want to touch on that for a bit?
Yeah, I mean, even if you think about it just in your own personal life, not you, but listeners, if you are the average person and you've tried some way of manipulating your body, if you've tried it more than once, you have to ask yourself, why is that? Because if it worked the first time, you wouldn't have to try it more than once, right? If it worked the first time, you would still be on it. Right. But the thing is, it didn't work the first time, at least not long term, or it did, and then you decided to do something else because you were happy with where you were, and then things changed, and now you're not, so you have to try again. And even if you try the same one, it doesn't work the same way anymore, because your body adapts, and it just will start to fight back. And the whole purpose is self-preservation, right? So if we're doing something that equates it to being in a famine, even if we're like, oh yeah, we're feeding ourselves, we are meeting all our numbers and all that, I don't want to specify numbers here, but if we're like, you know, trying to do what diet culture says is not a diet, it's just a wellness plan or whatever thing it is, eventually that will feel like a diet, and your body will respond like it's on a diet. And because of that, you will start to have problems with your eating. It starts to distance yourself from all the internal cues. You're overriding them. You're learning weird thoughts around your food, weird emotions around your food, weird rules around your food and eating and all this. And you start to see like cutting yourself out of social activities, or like putting a damper on them, because you're constantly thinking about food. And when you wake up, is your day, you know, is your mood and your day determined by numbers on the scale, or how good you did this or that, or how you're feeling, or what you're able to eat or not eat, and all these things, right? Like it just interferes with life. It sucks out so much energy, attention and time. And when you think about how much, like we have some statistics around how diets, and not even like being on a structured diet, like, oh, I'm following a specific diet with a name, right? Like even just trying to modify your diet, your eating plan, if you're doing it for the purposes of losing weight or changing your shape or your size, even if it works, in the short run, over time, it's not going to work. Over time, you're going to gain that weight back. I think it's like 90 something percent of people who lose weight will gain it back. Yeah. And then when you're looking at how many people actually gain even more weight back, which isn't a bad thing, right? Like this is a neutral thing. This is just a descriptor of like bodies, like saying someone's really tall and then they got taller. Like, okay, someone's big and they got bigger. It's fine. But when you think about the reason why people are doing this, like this is a pretty sobering statistic, I think. It's like when we're chasing this thing that is not attainable. It's just like really ridiculous and sad. And I'm not faulting the people who are doing this. I think the blame a lot of times is actually with the people who are pushing this really hard. Right. Unfortunately, some of the healthcare system, society at large, our beauty standards, all of this, like it's just something that we've learned is the responsible thing to do. And so, yeah, I mean, who doesn't want to feel like a responsible, disciplined person who eats well and feels healthy and all of these things, right? So it's not like, anybody listening to this, if this is where you are right now, this is not like your fault for being in this situation, right? And this is not something where your body's broken and everybody else can do it better. Yeah. No, you are in the majority here, right? Only less than 10% of humans worldwide will be able to do this successfully, quote unquote. And there is even some thoughts around like, what is that and why is that? It's like not just metrics. What metrics? Yeah. It's not to say successful. Like, oh, I need to be the 10%. Like that's not what I'm saying here. I'm saying like this is a ridiculous goal for us as humans.
Absolutely. And like I think eating good and eating healthy is so difficult. Like I moved out of my parents' house last year, and that was definitely something, I knew that it would be like harder, right? Like making my own meals and stuff. But one, when I was like, hey, I'm trying to eat healthy, I'm like, one, this is like so expensive, to like eat healthy. And two, I feel like so much of like the food, at least like in North America, is like so unhealthy even if you like try to make healthy. So I really struggled with that. And then I was trying to like, figure out things that maybe like triggered my hormonal acne and stuff. So then I'm like, okay, I'm cutting this out. And then I'm like, okay, what is there left for me to even make a meal out of? And then it's like, okay, I have to make 3 meals a day. Like, what is this, So it's definitely very like exhausting. And I wouldn't say I was at a point where I woke up or as I progressed throughout my day, all I thought about was food, but it was definitely something in the back of my mind that was like, this is a bit of a struggle. And I think it's hard to like always just try to stick to that discipline of like eating perfect like every single day. And like, what does that even like exactly mean? Because I think it's just so complex in terms of like what's categorized as good food and what's categorized as bad food. And I think any person you talk to will tell you completely different things,
Yeah. And it's so confusing, right? So that's why I tell people like one of the biggest appeals to intuitive eating is that it's based on you. And so you and your body know what you need because years and years and years, we didn't have nutrition science to tell us what had more vitamins than the other thing, right? Like we just knew that we were alive and we stayed alive. And that was great. And this thing gave us energy. And this thing didn't feel so good. And that thing made someone sick. So let's not eat that one. Things like that. Like we just figured it out. And it was fine, right? Exactly. Like humans survived and thrived. Yeah. And I think that going back to that, it just makes it like way simpler, right? Like, yes, we have a lot of food. We have a lot of food options. That's great. It's very convenient, right? I don't think that there's anything wrong with using some of our convenient options. Especially when we're talking about like neurodivergence, or I specialize in helping women with a lot going on. So there's a lot of times that we need shortcuts, and we need, whether that's like food shortcuts or like how-to shortcuts, like, in the actual, like, how do I prepare the food or like plan the food or whatever. We just need those shortcuts because life is busy and crazy, and people have complicated food so much that we just really need it to be uncomplicated.
Yeah, and just simple it down. And I think for myself, like one thing I really struggle with is like finding the time to like prep meals and stuff. And I do tend to like kind of fall back on ordering food just because like I work so much. I like have 2 jobs and I'm still in school. So for me, sometimes food isn't like my top priority. I try to still eat good with like what I order or whatever, but I can't say I like devote a lot of time to like, okay, this is what I'm going to eat and like planning that out, and it's definitely tough to make that like a top priority, especially like if you have a lot going on, you have a family, like prepping that for like multiple people, like it's a lot, and especially do that every single day, it's like it's definitely stressful.
Yeah, it is. And there's like really solid tips that can help, right? But if we're so focused on like it has to be a certain way, then that's very limiting in terms of what tips we're willing to consider.
Right.
Right. So I think that even in that, like, yes, it's good to be fed, right? Like that's where I always start with is like, yay, you fed yourself, right? Like you survived another day and you fed yourself.
Yeah.
Great. That's the first step, right? That's like the bare minimum. You put something in your body. Congratulations.
Right.
Yeah. You were surviving as a human being. And of course, most people I feel like would want more, right? But some days, like that's all you got. Like that's good enough.
Exactly. You're gonna have those good days and bad days. I guess kind of shifting a little bit, something I definitely want to talk about, and I think that something a lot of people maybe struggle with, or just, you know, have this like ongoing battle with, is cravings. And what are your opinions on that? How do you kind of advise people to go about their cravings? And do you have any tips on, like, I guess, I know we keep talking about like taking down those boundaries, but are there any tips you have on like maintaining maybe like a softer boundary when it comes to cravings?
Yeah, you know, the most common thing I see with cravings, and this is something that's not just in my professional practice, but also when I talk to colleagues and in behavioral science in general, the more that we say we can't have something, the more that we want it, right?
Yeah.
So even if you think that, oh yeah, I can have all foods fit, everything in moderation, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's go with that, because I hear this one a lot. I believe in all foods, everything fits, everything in moderation. Okay, fantastic. I'm struggling though. I have such a sweet tooth. I have such big cravings, you know, blah, blah, blah.
That's literally me. Okay. I have the worst sweet tooth of life.
So here's the thing. First, we'll start off with one, there's nothing wrong with having a sweet tooth. There's nothing wrong with sweets. Two, if that's, well, okay. And any of these things that are super controversial, I think for some people when they're hearing this, like feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to discuss more, or like get in a debate with you or whatever, because like you're welcome to disagree with me. And there's plenty of professions who disagree with me. There's plenty of dietitians who disagree with me. I've talked to many people who just like in general disagree with me. That's fine. Here's a quick thing though. If I tell you don't think about your phone, what did you just think about?
Your phone.
Your phone. Were you thinking about it prior to me telling you not to think about it? So here's what I did. I just set you up to fail. Yeah. Because in order to do what I asked you, to not think about your phone, you'd have to expend so much extra energy when you didn't have to do that anyway, and you weren't doing it anyway prior to start. But I created this rule that now makes it off limits. And now you are thinking about it, but now you're failing. So then you have to do something to fix that feeling. And then here we have the problem.
Like, an ongoing
right.
circle.
So it's the same thing. Like that by itself will cut out a lot of the problem that people have with cravings, right? I'm not saying the cravings will go away. Like there are things, like I like to think of it as kind of multifactorial. So that by itself is number one, because it's like the low hanging fruit. If you think it's off limits, it will be off limits. It will create this big drama. You want it more. Okay. So if we truly give ourselves unconditional permission to eat all foods at all times and all amounts, which is super scary, I know, especially if you're not used to hearing this, because the fear then automatically goes to, but I would eat forever in large amounts where I feel so sick, whatever the thing is I'm craving, right? Yeah. And you might, right? You might do that for several weeks even. But even just now, put yourself in that position several weeks into the future where you've eaten all the sweets that you could possibly eat and you've really enjoyed them. Would you eventually want something different?
Yeah.
Okay. So you already know, you already know that your body would naturally come around to balancing that out, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so you get sick of something like so quickly. It can definitely take over your mind of just like when you're not when you're told like don't think about this, don't do this. It's like even when you're like a kid especially, right? Like your parents tell you don't push that button, don't like spill over, you know, don't do whatever it is. And what are you gonna do? You're gonna do it because you know you're like testing the waters, like how much trouble could I get into if I do this, right? And it's the exact same thing. But I think some things that, and I'm not saying like this works for everyone, I think that's also a thing people don't realize is like everybody is so different. What works for you won't work for me and whatever else. So knowing that is super important. But for me personally, like funny enough, like actually working out when I was working out a lot, I had like no sweet cravings. It was so strange. And like I have the biggest sweet tooth ever. Oh, I remember what I was talking about. I was saying, because you were saying that you're going to get sick of something. Yes. So my dad would always do the grocery shopping in our house. And whatever me and my brother's fix was that week, let's say like a snack like Gushers, let's say, right? So we were like obsessed with Gushers or whatever it was. And we would tell him like, we love this snack. Like, keep getting this snack. It's so good. So of course, then the Gushers would like go on sale and he'd be like, oh, perfect. The kids love these. And he'd buy like 10,000 boxes of them, right? He'd bring them home. And by that time, we were sick of them. So like a week later, he'd be like, kids, like you told me you loved this one snack and now they've all gone bad in the like pantry. What's going on? And we'd be like, oh, we're not really into Gushers anymore. We like this snack now. You know? So it's like, that made me think of that because it definitely goes to show like you're going to get sick of something really fast if you keep eating it every single day and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And even if you don't get to the point where you dislike it, like I've had clients who, I'm thinking of one person, she loved mint chocolate chip ice cream. And we had talked about this and it was the thing that she felt like, if I eat this, if I give myself permission, I would have it forever. And I would just eat giant tubs of this. So she bought it and had it in the house instead of having it like off limits somewhere. I can eat it whenever, but I can only eat it out of the house or whatever.
Right.
So she brought it into the house and it went really fast the first couple of times. And then she tried different flavors and she liked this one the best. And she tried different brands and she liked this one the best.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that she found, like that was just an information gathering, right? It's not a bad thing that we eat something that we're craving.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at it again, neutrally, right? Like, oh, this happened. I wonder why that happened. How was that experience for me? Did I even enjoy it? Because sometimes we eat it so fast that we don't even enjoy it. Or we have so much guilt that we're not enjoying it, or whatever it is, right? Like, if you're going to do it, like, slow down, enjoy it. And it's neutral. So if you don't, like, that's fine. You can just choose something different, right? Like, now you know.
And I think having that option there brings up a great point because when I started living alone, like, I was like, this is great. I can buy like whatever foods I want now, blah, blah. Shelly, when I tell you the amount of like sweets and like, let's say like junk food that like went bad, like I never ate, that I did not touch, I was like, oh, okay. Like I just didn't eat it. You know, it was there if I wanted it. And like, yeah, some days maybe like I craved like some of the chocolate or whatever and I allowed myself to have some, but it's like for the most part, like I kind of just forgot about it.
Well, yeah. And maybe it served a different purpose, right? So like, that's the other piece I was talking about is like, it might not be, I mean, most of the time there is a component of restriction, but there's also other things going on most of the time as well. Like there's like, what if it's just about like, this is your way of expressing your independence in this moment or a sense of fun. Like maybe moving is stressful and transitions are hard. And, you know, having something that feels like a safety blanket can be really fun, right? Like, hey, that's nice. It's there if I need it. You didn't need it. So it went bad, right? Like there's lots of functions that food can serve and they don't all have to be physical. And there's lots of reasons that we might have cravings and they don't all have to be physical and they don't like have to carry that weight and the burden of like being bad and all of that. And like, maybe we're just stressed and like sugar cravings go up when we're stressed. Maybe we're hungry because we're not eating enough in general, you know, lots of things, lots of reasons, but it's so fascinating to me when we start getting into like all the details of this.
Yeah.
We could talk a long time about that.
No, for sure. And it's like, it's crazy too, because I remember when I was doing online school because of COVID and man, was I snacking like crazy during that time because I was sitting at home watching lectures online that were like organic chemistry and like these courses that were like, I don't know, boring at times. So what would I do? I'd go grab a snack and I would be eating and snacking because I was bored, not because I was hungry. You know, and now like because I'm literally out of the house like all day long, it's like, okay, I eat like in the morning, I eat at lunch, I eat at dinner, and it's like I don't think about snacking because I'm like always, my mind's always busy, you know. And not saying I never snack, like there's days that are like, you know, less busy and then I'm like, oh, like I'd like this, or you know, whatever, maybe I'm just craving it in that moment. But it's interesting how like, yeah, your environment and what you're doing every day really impacts how you're actually gonna eat.
Yeah. And then just to throw like another random layer into this is like sometimes when we are so busy, we don't even check in with ourselves. So we may be hungrier than we think we are.
Right.
And so there's that balance, right? Between like not having cravings, but also like, are we ignoring our signals and not having enough food in general?
And
So you gotta
prioritizing,
find that.
like,
Yeah.
taking the time to be like, okay, I've been like working all day, like, have I taken the time to like, refuel my body? And I think that mindset of like seeing food as like fuel is something that a lot of people have a hard time with. I know when I got into like working out, I was like, I could feel myself getting into that like unhealthy mindset of like, oh, like I'm not that hungry, like maybe I just like won't eat right now, and then I realized like for my workouts to actually be significant, like I need to be eating actually more now than I did before, because I'm consuming so much more energy. I need to make sure my protein, like I'm taking in more protein. I need to make sure I'm like just eating more in general. So it's interesting, like on that side of things too, like learning that food is fuel and knowing that, what you need in certain situations.
Yeah, totally. And it changes, right? Like what you need now may not be the same as what you need later, and even from day to day. So like maybe, on a week, yeah, you need more than you did like a week a year ago, but day to day in that week, like your needs may be different. And so it shouldn't
absolutely
surprise us like when we're saying like, oh my gosh, I'm eating so much more than yesterday.
No,
okay,
for sure.
You're eating so much more than yesterday. Like, okay.
Well, your body tells you too. Like if you're hungry, your body tells you. And there's some days where like I swear the hours go by and I'm like, oh, like I don't feel hungry, and it's like it's lunchtime, but I just don't feel that hungry. So maybe I'll get like a smaller lunch that day. But then the next day I'll eat my lunch and I'm like, I feel like I didn't eat anything. Like I was starved, So it's like just listening to yourself, like, and listening to your body. And I think I want to kind of drive this into the next topic I want to touch on was, I think a huge thing I've learned is how much food actually does affect my body in terms of like what I'm actually eating, and making sure that I am eating the things that my body needs. Like, for example, a few years ago, I found out like I have like low iron. So like I definitely kind of had to realize, oh, like I could kind of fix this in a way through my eating. Of course, like I also started taking like iron supplements and stuff just to really make sure I was getting back on track. But similarly to like when I got off birth control and my hormones like went all crazy, I was like, you know what? Through what I'm eating, I can definitely try to also balance my hormones or look at different like foods that may trigger my acne or not. And stuff like that. So what's kind of like your kind of perspective on that and kind of navigating the world of like knowing what your body needs? Because I know it's super complicated and it took me forever to try to, and it's still like I'm still on this journey of trying to figure out what won't trigger my acne and what will, and it changes all the time. But
yeah, I think it's such a broad question that I'm going to give a broad answer. My recommendation would be to work with somebody who actually knows your situation. So if that's within your budget, right, and what you're able to do time-wise and things like that, or if you're able to make that work, that would be my number one recommendation, because then you get that support, like somebody who knows you and knows what they're talking about, rather than just like a bunch of TikTok, like, hey, look, I think I have this problem, and I'm looking and I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe I can do this and this, and like piece it all together from you don't know where and like what information they actually have. So
well, everyone's so different.
Right. And you don't know. So I think, working with somebody who can take nutrition science, like in general, right? Because we study populations. We don't study every person individual. You are the expert in you. I may be the expert in nutrition and expert in nutrition, but I don't know you and your life and your personality and your, needs and everything exactly, right? I can guess based on population level data. And I can see patterns and stuff once we're talking it through, right? But I won't know exactly unless we work together and then you tell me, right? Like that's the only way.
Yeah, and I think also like going into it, I would say with maybe low expectations of like this person might not fully understand, it might not be a perfect fit right away, like I know I've had my share experience with doctors who are just like, I've had doctors tell me food has nothing to do with your acne. There's no way that food can cause like your acne to flare up. And I was sitting there like, what? I was like, am I hearing this right? So like I've had those experiences where like Accutane was the only thing that was pushed on me, and I was like, are you sure about that? Like there has to be other factors to it, right? And I know there are. I know like everything that your environment, what you put into your body, how much sleep you get, your stress levels, as you said, like it's also intertwined, and it all plays a role on each other. So it's definitely difficult to pinpoint that, but I think going into it with low expectations of like, I might not find my perfect fit right away, whether that's like with your nutrition plan or the person that you choose to help you out with this. Like, you know, you have to put in the work, and it might be a really long road, but just having that goal of like kind of the person you want to find and finding that perfect fit is definitely important. It's just like dating, right? Like, you're not gonna go on the first date and find your perfect match. You have to endure some maybe shitty dates, and then you might get there. But I think it's
I think it's definitely that the matchmaking process, because I mean, I don't know how many people I've talked to that they were not quite a good fit, personality or finances or, you know, approach like to nutrition in general or whatever it is, and okay, I just recommend somebody else and move on, right? Like, it's not a big deal. Like, people aren't going to be mad at you for talking with them and then just trying something else. It
didn't work. You can let them down easy. It's not you, it's me. I guess kind of going on from there, I want to ask your opinion on maybe some typical like diet things that are seen. We can kind of go like maybe a little speed round on this, but as a nutritionist, I just want to get your opinion on some of these. In my opinion, maybe some of these like gimmicky diet, I don't even know what to call them, like tips and tricks, I don't know, diet hacks, I don't know.
All right. I get quite worked up about this, so I'll try to keep it like contained to, like a short snap.
Okay, first one, detox teas or any detox item.
Oh man, again, some people will disagree with me on this, but you have a liver and kidneys and lungs and all sorts of other things, and that is why we have those organs. It's like, this is part of the detox process that naturally happens in your body. They're unnecessary.
Absolutely, I totally agree. People always tell me like, you need to detox your skin, like, or like there's the face masks out there that are like detox face mask, and I'm like, what? This just doesn't make sense. Like, I think, and that's such a like word that's like used, I think, like people are always like, you need to detox your body, and I'm like, from what? And like, how are you doing this with like a tea? Like, it doesn't make any sense. But
or like pooping a whole bunch, like that's often, right?
And it's like, no shit that like you weigh less like after drinking that tea. It's like, it's just speeding up the process of your body. Okay, next thing I want to ask about is, I guess, kind of with that, like a juice cleanse. It's kind of along the same lines, but
I mean, any kind of magical food, right? Like, I'm not talking about magical fruit like makes you fart, although there is some, depending on what you're making the juice out of, I guess. But I think it's like, so if you love juice, fantastic. Include some juice in your eating, right? But seeing this as like the only thing you're allowed to eat, I mean, that doesn't make sense. And it's going to be really hard to keep up, right? So you're going to want to chew. We have teeth for a reason, and you're probably going to have some GI effects after that. And depending on what you put on the juice, like, there could be other issues. So again, unnecessary, unrecommended.
Okay, perfect. You heard it here, folks. I guess next thing I want to talk about is, I see this a lot in like, I guess, celebrity, like what I eat in a day or whatever, where some of these people like won't eat until like, let's say like 2 p.m. and until then they'll only like drink water. And I'm not saying that this type of fasting doesn't work for anyone. I just want to know your opinions on it.
Why are you doing this? Because again, if it's because you want to change your body shape or size, so that's your first thing to address, right? If you're saying it's because you think this is a healthier way of doing things, I would say that the evidence is mixed and possibly against you in that. But it also teaches you really weird behaviors around your internal signals. So if you're hungry and it's not the right time to eat, you have to override your body in order to tell it. And then you are only contained to that amount of time when you're allowed to eat. And it's just a form of restriction, but using a clock instead of food rules. Right.
And I know like my body, like especially like when I'm in the same routine every day, it's like, I'm hungry at this hour every single day. Like 12 o'clock hits and it's like, my body's like, it's lunchtime, you know, like it just, that's how it is. And I think I wanted to ask, like, what is kind of, I don't even want to say like the science, but the reasoning behind, like, let's say, why some people would assume that, let's say, eating X amount of calories spread out throughout the whole day versus that same X amount of calories in a smaller window. Like, is there any like science behind that being able to, let's say, cause like fat loss? Because I know I've seen people online like talk about this, and I'm like, I don't know about that.
Yeah. So, and this is interesting because it depends on who you're looking at with studied, right? For
Right.
men, that may be so. For
Okay.
women, it's actually possibly detrimental to your health. And I think for humans in general, like when we're trying to restrict like this, like it ends up causing some stress, and it ends up changing your social schedule, and it ends up changing like your work and your energy and all of these things. And yes, you may get used to it, but we can also get used to a whole lot of things that are not very helpful for us. So just because somebody is used to it and has adjusted doesn't mean that that's a good indicator that it's helpful. There's actually some evidence that shows that if you eat spread out throughout the day, that your body is more able to handle like, you know, the ups and downs of your blood sugar and the digestion and all of this when we eat in large amounts. And again, this also depends on what you're eating. When we eat in large amounts at once, sometimes that can lead to other issues like indigestion or again, generally, right? Because I have to summarize like broadly. Also, you're going to have like a bigger blood sugar spike, which means you'll have to have a larger insulin spike. When we're talking about hormone health and things like that, like insulin is one of those hormones, and that can also have impacts on our health, right? While there's some mixed evidence for certain conditions and the possibility of intermittent fasting or having like a smaller eating window, I don't think it's worth the risk of developing some really weird eating behaviors and going against your natural body's signals that it puts out about when is it healthy and when is it hungry and when is it not hungry, and you know, all these different things. Like you're teaching yourself to override those signals. And then what we tend to do around eating doesn't usually stay around eating, right? Usually we're doing that around other things too. So now what other signals are you also trying to override and try to control where we don't have that control?
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, no, that's definitely I think a good perspective on it. And just going back to, again, those like restrictions and how that can kind of set you up for a sort of failure for sure. I guess next thing I want to bring up, again, like a bunch of these like diet things I see on TikTok or whatever. What's your opinion on like keto dieting?
Oh, I think it's just another version. It's like a slightly more modern version of like Atkins and stuff like that. Like every once in a while, right? It's like fashion, like any trend, right? They come in waves.
Yeah.
And then we cycle back to something else and give it a new name and tweak it a little bit and pull it out as something new.
Yeah.
It's basically carb reduction.
Right.
And you're saying like, this is now the thing to do.
Okay.
I don't see it as something drastically new from any of the other things I wouldn't recommend.
Right. Got it. Interesting. Very interesting. What's your opinion on like because I just like know with like my schedule, like as I said, like sometimes I find it hard to like make sure one thing I do really well is making sure I drink enough water every day. I think I do a good job at that. But I know when it comes to like my like fruits and veggies, sometimes I don't do as well, especially if I'm like grabbing lunch on the go, like stuff like that. What's your opinion on like things like athletic greens or like kind of that all-in-one greens supplement?
Yeah, you know, I think anytime we're talking about supplement safety aside, and I'm not familiar with athletic greens, so I'm not going to comment specifically to them. I'm just making that very clear.
Yeah. Just general, like those.
Generally, supplements to replace food. I think when we're looking at that, I think it can be helpful as we adjust to finding, like I was talking about earlier, right? When we need help figuring out how do we incorporate these things, like, great, I think that can be a very helpful tool. Or if we're having a resurgence of some of the more difficult barriers in our lives, like not a lot of time or something, you know, is throwing us off of our normal schedule or normal coping abilities, fantastic. That's a great
like that
thing
shortcut
to have.
kind of.
Yeah, using those shortcuts when we have them, right? But to say like this is completely replacing every aspect of fruits and vegetables, I would probably say most likely not. We don't really know all the benefits of fruits and vegetables, so still say like it's generally recommended to have them in food form.
Right. No, I totally agree with that. And I myself like use Bloom. It's similar to like athletic greens, and I would never, you know, go online and say this, like, I'll never eat a fruit again. This has replaced that for me completely. But especially like I live alone, so like buying fruits and veggies a lot of the time, they go bad so fast. I buy a lot of actually frozen fruits and veggies because those I can throw into a smoothie, whatever. I find when I go back to my parents' house, my mom always loves to cut me up like a plate of fruits because she's obsessed with them. But in like a household like that, like I think it's easier to like, go through them and stuff. But when I live alone, it's like they just go bad so fast. So it's like sometimes I do take those shortcuts there for sure. And it does definitely help out when you're in a pinch and when you need it. I guess kind of going off that topic, I did want to ask, what are your tips to like eating healthier without trying so hard?
Yeah. The first one is to really become aware that you can have all foods in all quantities. Like that's okay. And if that feels scary, then the next step would be to really start looking into intuitive eating and like do some serious research. There's a really good book out there called Intuitive Eating. It's now in its 4th edition. It's by Elise Resch and Evelyn Tribbley. Very good. It walks you through the steps. It gives you a lot of like real world examples and personal kind of stories and things like that to help say like, hey, even though you have some fears or doubts or things like that, you can actually still make this work. And here's how it looks in different situations. I think that is like a really key resource. And then, just like go for variety, go for satisfaction. We have research that shows that if you eat for satisfaction, and satisfaction, the way I describe satisfaction is it's different than pleasure. Pleasure is all about right now, what tastes and feels good right now. Satisfaction is now and after you eat.
More long term.
Yeah, more long term, right? Like how are you going to feel 2 hours from now after you've eaten? How are you going to feel the next morning? Those kinds of things, right? Like
that's a great
when you're thinking about it broader.
Yes. I think that's a great point because kind of as you said, like for myself, I just know like if I, go like and I don't know, have like a burger and a milkshake, like in that moment I'm like, this is exactly what I was craving. It's like hitting everything I needed. It's giving everything it needed to give. But then I know like an hour from now I'll have the worst stomachache of my life, so it's like I think that's a great point. And as long as you like go into that with those expectations, I think it's fine to still do that every now and then, right? It's the same with like if you like to drink, like especially when it comes to like sugary drinks or whatever, you might feel like crap the next day and you just have to like remember that. And maybe you feel like crap a little too much and then you're like, you know what, maybe I'm not gonna do that anymore, right? So it's just finding that balance, which I think is a great thing that you bring up. And I really appreciate that you have that mindset because I don't hear that a lot, especially in the like nutrition and kind of diet world. You don't always hear that. It's very like set hard rules, and I think that's what makes it so intimidating for a lot of people, and kind of that idea of like something you can't reach. Like I could never get there because it's like it's too hard, right? When really like if you just simple it down and kind of maybe don't take like all the opinions of the internet, you can actually get to a place where you are maybe more comfortable with kind of setting those goals for yourself. I did want to ask, I know everyone has like their opinions on this, but generally, like what everyone says, it's like drink, 6 to 8 cups of water a day, have like 1 to 2 cups of fruits and I may be completely wrong on this, but this is just like I'm just going based on what I can remember. 1 to 2 cups of like fruits and veggies, get like at least like 15 minutes of like exercise each day or 4 times a week. I don't remember, but like what are the top things that you think are like pillars, I guess, in like kind of having a healthier lifestyle, similar to kind of some of the things I mentioned there?
I think if we add to the things that I was talking about before, right? Eat a variety, eat for satisfaction, eat with an all foods fit mentality, move in a way that is enjoyable, or if it's not enjoyable, because some people, they don't actually get very many endorphins from moving. So at least not like super detestable, right? Something that you could tolerate. Yeah. Again, going for that satisfaction feeling, like, okay, if I can't be like, this is amazing and I feel like I'm glowing afterwards, then what do you not feel like dying afterwards? And like hating your life while you're doing it and that kind of thing.
No,
yeah,
absolutely.
So move a little bit and drink some water, ideally, where you feel like you're hydrated. You can experiment with the exact amount. Big secret, we don't actually know what the exact amount is. It's been like there's like so many different formulas to calculate it and so many different things, and they're all guesses.
Well, it just depends on your body too. I feel like it depends on your weight and height and
your activity and the temperature and all kinds of
your environment too. Like I feel like here, like where I live, I drink so much water purely because it's so dry. And it's like if I don't drink this much water, like I would turn to a lizard. Like, you know?
Right. So you kind of just know what to do, like based on your body through experimentation. Right. And if you feel stuck, then you get some guidance, right? But yeah, sleep, stress management, being social or being connected to some group, and having some kind of spiritual practice. Like those are the top things that we know from like many research studies are helpful. Exact amounts vary, right? Depending on the person and all that. I wouldn't worry so much. Like for the average person, I wouldn't worry so much about exact amounts. What I would look at is saying, which area do I feel like focusing on the most right now? Like, what's the most appealing to me? Where am I now? And how can I move just a little bit closer to where I want to be?
That's a great point. And I think it's so interesting too that you bring up points of like sleep and stress management, because people forget about how much that can actually impact not only your health, obviously, but even like your eating habits or other parts of your life, your productivity, your mood, all these things, because it's all so like interconnected, as I said previously. And even like look at sleep, right? Like everyone says, like, make sure you're getting about 8 hours of sleep. For myself, like I typically need, it's interesting because I feel like I can feel super awake with 7 hours of sleep, like exactly 7 hours, and I'm like ready to go. But later in the day, I might like start to feel a little tired. If I get like 9 hours of sleep, I typically don't wake up feeling as like ready to go, but I feel like less tired throughout the day. So it's like, it's so interesting, and that varies. Some days like I'm good to function off like 7 hours or less, and other days I'm like, I need like a long ass like 10 hours sleep tonight, you know? Whereas I have some friends, like I have this one friend who consistently, she gets like 6 hours sleep a night, and she's like, that just is what works for me, you know? So I don't know, it's just so interesting too. Like obviously there's going to be like averages and what's kind of like recommended, but it just so depends on you and what works for you.
Right. Taking that population level data and changing it to the personal, right? Personal application.
Because like I shouldn't feel ashamed for like wanting to sleep more than 8 hours a night. It's like, this is what my body needs. Like my body is telling me, you feel tired, that means I need more than 8 hours, even though like society tells me, oh, you should be completely fine to function off of 8, you know? So I think that's sometimes what people have a hard time with, is like stepping away from what, you know, is kind of put on them by society and like these standards of like, this is what you should be doing, and if you're not doing this, you're wrong.
And like, if it changes from day to day, it's wrong.
Yes, it has to be constant.
Yeah,
all throughout. Like
you are not allowed to be a human. You have to be a robot.
Yes, exactly. That's totally it. It's just so, I don't know, it's mind-boggling, but it's so easy to like get like sucked back into that, you know? Like we're talking about this now and like we both know these things, but I'm sure you have days as well where you kind of get sucked back into that mindset of like, oh wait, should I be doing that? And then you're like, no. Like you like shake yourself out of it and you're like, I'm fine, like I'm doing just fine.
Right. Going back to the original thing that we were talking about, right? Like it's just so easy to feel like we have to be perfect or we have to do it all exactly, you know? And then the extra pressure to say like, oh yeah, like, yeah, I think we have more responsibility if we're teaching, but I don't think we have more need to be doing it exactly right. Or perfectly just because we're teaching it. Like, I don't think so. I think part of being a good teacher is that we also are human.
And I don't think you can properly teach on something unless you go through it yourself, you know?
Yeah, you teach differently for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I did want to ask, has there ever been struggle like in your career, you know, with like the people you work with or clients and talking about nutrition, because it can be such a sensitive topic to so many people who have struggled with their relationship with food? And has that like been something that you've had to like learn and kind of curate how you deal with that depending on the person and their relationship with food?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably similar to you, you know, when you're talking to somebody about even acne. I mean, acne, it's a medical condition, but a lot of people see it as like a you know, aesthetics issue. And I think food is similar, right? Like we see it as, oh, I have this medical thing, or they don't want it to be a medical thing, but they feel like it's a behavioral thing, or they feel like it's, you know, an aesthetic thing in some cases or whatever. And, or it's linked so strongly to some other issue. One of the things that I learned early on, actually, I did learn this in college, was that nutrition especially for when you're talking about a relationship with food and that aspect, not just like the nutrition therapy aspect, it's really important to get other people involved and know where your professional boundaries are. So as a dietitian, as a nutrition mindset coach, I have certain professional boundaries, and I am not qualified to do things like mental health, right? Or family therapy. And so I refer out that person to also get supported by those professions so that they can more effectively address the food stuff.
Absolutely.
And like sometimes, we have a blended scope of practice, like there's some overlap, but yeah, for the people who it's really, really tied together, like I see the most progress when they're also in therapy.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a great thing to hear, that you're like, I know what I'm good at, I know what I'm qualified in, and it's not everything. And I think that's maybe something a lot of you people out there on the internet need to take a note on, because some of you think you're certified in everything, no matter what it is, and always provide your opinion, which it's great, like provide your opinion, but I think a lot of people are just like, this is the right answer, and I know everything about all of this, and it's like,
maybe provide your opinion with a disclaimer, right?
Yeah, it literally drives me crazy, but that's another issue. But I think I can definitely relate on that too. Like, I obviously, give my advice. I'm not certified, I guess, in like telling people how to be more confident, but I just give my personal opinions and stuff. I've never claimed to like, have a, I guess, profession in that aspect. Like, I'm a chemical engineer, like that's what I study in school. It's like has nothing to do with like confidence or kind of this mental health aspect. I do talk about it and I do provide my insights, but when I have had people reach out to me privately and be like, you know what, I'm really struggling with this, like I need your help, I make sure I don't take on that responsibility, and I do help refer them to someone else, because I am just not like equipped to help someone really go past like those huge mental health hurdles. I can, talk about my experience online and hopefully it'll resonate with some people, but I'm just not there to coach someone through getting over those hurdles themselves, because everyone's different, and I'm no expert in that field, so can't claim to be. And I think it's really great that you're like, I know my place in this, like I can help with these things, but I won't be able to help with everything. And I think that's great, and that's why we each have the thing we're good at, and then we can all help each other out and learn from each other. I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's helpful for me to remember that I am helping by referring, right? Like that is how I help in certain situations. Like I provide a referral.
Absolutely. So obviously, as I've mentioned a million times already, like I very publicly like struggle with hormonal acne. A lot of people have asked me like, how did you find out it was hormonal? And I'm like, honestly, just from like testing out, as you mentioned as well, like kind of testing out what your body kind of and how your body reacts to certain things. And when I got off of hormonal birth control, it like flared up my skin so bad, and I was like, that makes sense. I already had a suspicion it was hormonal, but now it's like, in my opinion, pretty confirmed. And there's definitely certain like foods, especially like in society, that are like a big no for acne. For example, like dairy, or some people do say like go completely plant-based. I'm not, like I definitely eat meat and stuff, but just some examples there, or stick to like low glycemic foods or whatever. What is your stance on that? And do you think there is like a definite correlation between like food and acne? Because I know it's kind of like a gray area topic in terms of like research and like direct correlations.
Right. So disclaimers. This is educational, not specific to you, like you, Lavi, or you listeners.
Yeah, you have to put the disclaimer.
I do have to put this disclaimer. As a healthcare provider, I am not providing you with healthcare advice right now. So this is just education, and it's general.
Yeah.
If we're specifically talking about hormonal acne, well, one thing to know before I say like specific recommendations, one thing to know is that recommendations vary by provider, even if we agree on the same like way of seeing healthcare, but they also vary by like tradition that we use or the lens that we use, right? So there are, for example, like broadly saying in a big bubble, I know there's a lot of variation within this bubble, but like natural health providers will most likely have a different set of recommendations and science they're pulling from and interpretations of that science than I might have as a not quite natural health provider, right?
Right.
I'm not
Absolutely.
totally like 100% Western medicine, but I'm not like what
Somewhere
most
in the
people would
middle.
provide, would call like natural health. So that said, there is some research evidence for some certain foods. There's a correlation. It does not mean there's a causation.
Yes.
The difference is like, if you eat this, it will cause this.
Right.
Versus if you eat this, there's a chance that it may or may not cause this, or it
Mhm.
might be the other direction. Like maybe something about people who have acne is also driving, eating these foods, or something totally different. Like there used to be a study about radios and mental health, mental illness. Like if
Interesting.
you own a radio at home, it will cause mental illness. And they were like, no, that's not how that works. It's just because the rise of radios at home was going up. At the same time, the mental health like diagnostic criteria were being developed and like being more widely known and used.
Yeah.
So that was going up.
Yeah, it was just happening in parallel, not like overlapping.
Yeah, they were unrelated, right? Yeah. So
absolutely.
Causation and correlation. We got to know that. But that aside, like now you know all the disclaimers and stuff. Dairy, there may be some evidence, but there may not be. You don't have to cut it out completely. Most of the research is based on like 3 servings of dairy. And this is, again, right, looking into like what are they actually saying. It's different when we count dairy for hormonal acne versus when we look at what is considered a dairy food, like in nutrition, like general nutrition, when you were talking about it, because cream cheese in the research studies for hormonal acne was actually considered a dairy food when it might not be considered like a true dairy food in like normal nutrition type of things.
Right.
So there's that type of like, you don't need to cut them all out. And again, nutrition therapy recommendations versus intuitive eating. Like I recommend nutrition therapy stuff after people have already got the mindset down, right? Otherwise it becomes really restrictive.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's the last disclaimer. So that chocolate is like hit and miss because it does have hormonal effects, and that's partly why. Dairy, same thing.
Well, is it more like because of the sugar? Like as you said, right? Like your sugar like levels rise.
It depends, right? Like because some people say that the glycemic index may be helpful. The issue with the glycemic index is then we look at individual foods, but that doesn't necessarily, that's not how we eat. We don't eat a food in isolation and then, in 100-gram amount. We eat it like
all mixes up.
Yeah, I'll mix it. So that changes the glycemic index. So we're actually looking at the glycemic load of the whole meal.
Right. And then you're having like 3 meals a day plus whatever snacks plus whatever.
Yeah. So it's more about, I wouldn't say like for me in practice, right? So there's what the research says, and then there's like practice recommendations.
Got it.
For me, what I generally say is like, can we help maintain more stable blood sugars? Not necessarily like specific foods at specific quantities and like all of these. Like, can we use this science to inform a practice that is more flexible and
like more bigger picture?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Interesting.
Yeah. So that's one of the big ones. Meats, again, mixed evidence for meats.
It's so interesting because I have some people in my comments who are like, you need to go on like a full like carnivore diet and that will cure your acne. That's what worked for me. And then I have another half of people telling me, you need to go completely vegan, like cut out all animal produce. And I'm like, so there's 2 sections of people telling me complete opposite things, and that is just what's worked for them.
Yeah. Like, and what else are they doing, right? Like a lot of times we don't do these in isolation. So we're making all these changes and we don't know it's the food. It's just we point to the food for everything.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about, right? Like how many are we also talking about stress is reduced just because we're trying anything?
Yeah.
Or we have hope and now that feels better. Or we're doing different skincare because a lot of times we're doing different skincare, right? At the same time, we're trying to do all these things.
And it's complicated. It's really hard and really complicated to isolate things and be like, no, this is what, like, it's hard to find that, like, that one thing that's like triggering, right? Your skin or your body or, all of that. It's definitely really hard to pinpoint it. I think for myself, just over time, like, I would say I have seen like a bit of a correlation with dairy. Again, definitely in moderation. If I have like a glass of milk once a month, it's definitely not gonna like completely flare up my skin. But luckily enough, I actually love oat milk. So I just like subbed that in, and then now I actually love oat milk more than regular milk. So it's just not even like something I think about where I'm like, oh, like, okay, I can't eat this. No, it's just like, I just don't need to, right? Unless, I mean, I wasn't like an avid like milk drinker like in the first place or anything like that, so I'm okay. But similarly, like whey protein, I found that once I started taking whey, which also, again, when I started taking whey protein, I was lifting heavy. So it's like two different things. I know lifting heavy and like types of workouts can also impact your hormones, but I started breaking out more significantly on my back than I have ever before. So I did switch the whey protein to vegan protein, and I did see that like that kind of went down, but I also wasn't lifting as heavy after that either. So it's like, oh, like I don't really know.
What if it was just friction acne, right? Like we don't actually know.
Yeah. But it's like, I'm kind of going to stick to that because whey protein kind of scared me when I saw my skin getting, triggered like that. So it's like, you find those things and sometimes you maybe gaslight yourself into thinking like, this is what, I must stay away from this. But yeah, it's so complicated. It's all so complicated with pinpointing. I guess another question, like we talked about the acne, what's your thoughts on like foods and like inflammation within like your body or like gut health, for example?
Those are two separate, like totally separate topics, inflammation and gut. I mean, they're related, but like you can have thoughts about inflammation and you can have thoughts about gut health.
Okay, let's talk about inflammation first and then we'll go to gut health.
All right. So short answer. There's like short-term inflammation that can be really essential to like muscle recovery and growth and healing and things like that, right? We need that. We don't want to cut out all inflammation.
Right.
We often hear inflammation is like this huge bad thing, but
stay away from it.
It's a normal, natural process that can be very helpful in our bodies.
Right.
Long-term chronic inflammation can cause a lot more problems. It can be caused by many problems, right? It's not just one thing. And it's not just the food. Stress can cause it. There's a lot of things. Lack of sleep. There are, again, mixed evidence. Depending on what school of thought you're coming from, there can be like incredibly diety recommendations around anti-inflammation diets, right? Or like ways of eating and ways of thinking and doing and being. And then there's like the whole school, like there's nothing with inflammation at all. Okay, we have some evidence that suggests that certain ways of eating may be more helpful for inflammation reduction or like helping manage that in a way that the normal processes can continue very well. And then the like inflammation out of bounds can like kind of reduce a little bit.
And what are like examples of those like, I guess, studies that have like shown correlations or like what ways of eating, I guess?
Like changing the ratio of our omega-3s to omega-6. And this is one that's really interesting to me because omega-6 and omega-3s, both essential.
Yeah.
Both essential. Omega-3 is known as the anti-inflammatory one. Omega-6 has some pro-inflammatory actions or like impacts. We need them both.
Right.
We like ideally would get them in like a 1-to-3 ratio. And so shifting, some of that is like you can do that two sides, right? You can increase your omega-3s or you can decrease your omega-6. If we do both, and again, we need them both, right? So don't cut them out altogether. So we just like shifting things around, right? Like to be able to support our bodies a little bit better in terms of inflammation. And, a lot of dairy gets picked on a lot and like pasta or something, like both of those are like can be fine. I think it's a lot of blood sugar management.
Okay.
Insulin can be pro-inflammatory. So managing your blood sugar can reduce some of the inflammation. Again, it won't eliminate it because we don't want to, but it can help to make that a little more even, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then kind of moving on to like gut health. Curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I'm not a gut health expert, knowing my boundaries, right? Not a gut health expert. There are gut health experts who are also experts in intuitive eating. So I recommend going to one of them if you're interested in details. But like we now know so much more and like we're researching more and more as a society, as a, nutrition science like field. It's just a growing interest in the gut because it's so linked to everything else in our body. And we have like an entire little ecosystem in there. All our bacteria is living in there. And so there's a lot of thoughts, again, depending on what school you're coming from, right? Not like university school, but like school of thought
Yeah.
that you're coming from, you will have very different opinions and recommendations around it.
Absolutely.
But like making sure that this is one of those benefits of eating lots of fruits and vegetables, right? Because they give us a lot of nutrients, including fibers, different kinds of fibers that can be incredibly helpful for our gut health.
Mhm.
And that's one of those places where like, oh yeah, if we get a variety, or if we get more, and we don't have to like aim for a certain amount, we can just say, hey, I'm going to try to put one more in like
Yeah.
this week or in this day or in this meal or whatever, depending on where you are, right? And just work from there. And then that will help a lot. Again, stress management, right? Big impact in gut health. The more stressed we are, the worse our gut health tends to be.
Well, and you don't want to be stressed about like, oh my gosh, I didn't put like an extra cup of fruits in my meal today.
Right.
You know? So it's like that will just make things worse if you're like constantly stressing out about it, right? So it's like it's the same thing I talked about like when it comes to like skincare. It's like, oh, you like, you know, picking your skin or hard on yourself, and then you're like, shoot, like I shouldn't, you know, and then it just like creates this like domino effect of like you're stressing out about your skin, which causes your skin to get worse, and then you stress out more, and it just keeps going. So it's like you just have to, I think stress is like, honestly, I think stress is the issue of everything at this point. Like it literally causes so many issues, and I've seen it with myself too. Like I don't talk about it this much, but this year, like, well, at the start of the year, I would say I had a lot of stress going on in my life, and I noticed that I was actually looking in the mirror and noticing a lot of like random, out of nowhere, like gray hairs, and I was like, what the heck? I'm 21. Why is this here? You know, like I had a bit of a freak out. And then like I actually noticed that those same hairs are now growing like at the root. They're my natural color again. And I'm like, huh, interesting, you know? And I'm like, okay, what's been like the big thing that's changed? And when I realized it's like kind of my stress. I don't know if that's it for sure. Again, there could be a multitude of reasons why that happened. But it was just an interesting like observation I saw, like change, like a physical appearance change I saw within my body where I was like, oh, something happened, then things kind of went back to normal. So
yeah. It's such an impact. I mean, all the things that you've been asking about, right? Like inflammation, gut health, blood sugar management, sleep, all of these things are impacted by stress. And like probably more that we've mentioned that I don't remember off the top of my head. So like it's such a big deal.
It is. It totally is. Well, I feel like we could keep going on forever, but thank you, Shelly, so much for coming on LoudTalk. I guess before we log off here, where can my viewers find you on socials or online if they want to get in touch with you or pick your brain or maybe debate you on some of these topics we talked about?
Right. Instagram is probably my like most used social platform.
Okay.
So I am Confident Nutrition Travels.
Okay.
Over on Instagram. My website is confidentnutritionnow.com. And from there you can get to pretty much everything else. I occasionally will do like a community event or something, like online community event and things like that. So you're welcome to join any of those things too.
Love it. Well, I'll have all those links down below if you're watching on YouTube, and if you're just listening in on Apple or Spotify or whatever streaming platform you're using to tune into LoudTalk, make sure to go check out the YouTube version because all the great links and resources will be right there where you can find Shelly or more of LoudTalk. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was so great talking to you, especially about all these topics that people aren't so loud about. So it was great to, you know, I definitely learned a lot, and it was great to kind of bounce some ideas back and forth. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening in today to this episode of LoudTalk. Just remember to stay loud, stay confident, and just keep shining your light in this crazy world we live in. And just remember that you are your own beauty standard, and you don't need to confine within the walls that society can kind of set out for us sometimes. So thank you everyone for listening. Remember to tell yourself something you love about your skin today, and I guess you guys will hear me in the next episode of LoudTalk. Bye everyone.